First, I want to talk about a few little updates I made to the outside of the loft. I said it didn't matter and I wasn't going to finish it, but I changed my mind. On the inside, I added some new lights where the kitchen is going to be, switched out the black pillar for an acrylic clear pillar, and up where the painting was above the bed, there used to be a white wooden alcove from an old window that I decided to eliminate. This is the side. Basically, I removed the window and replaced the whole side with a piece of glass from a picture frame. I redid the panes, distressed it, added some trim, and added some brick around the top of the window. That brick is made out of egg carton, which you will also see repeated on the back window. Now, I would have done it a little thicker had I had the room, but my shelf constrained how thick I could go with the egg carton. I'd like it to have stuck out a bit more, and I would love to have put a fire escape on the back of this warehouse, but again, my space restricted that. On the side, I tried something fun. I tried to do a ghost sign, which is like an old advertising on brickwork that has worn off with age. Could probably be a little bit more worn, but I'm happy with it. So here we are back at the front, and let's move on to the bedroom. I'm going to start with the wardrobe. The wardrobe is about 3.5 inches tall, putting it at about 7 feet. There is a tutorial for this on my YouTube channel and on the website. In the tutorial, you will notice that it has some doweling for legs, which was making it too tall. So I did take the legs off. The tutorial includes a PDF for you to print off at the end, where the pieces are to size. The tutorial also goes through what kind of wood I used, what kind of finishes I used, and a little bit about these funky little door handles. So let's go on to the next piece. Second piece I want to show you is the bed. The bed is a king-size bed, and it has attached nightstands. When I first decide I'm going to make a piece, I don't know exactly what I'm going to make. I will Google king-size modern bed. And more often than not, the site that it takes me to is Wayfair. And I think now it automatically does, just because I go there so much. But what's great about their site, and they're not the only one who does this, but what I like about it is that you can go under weights and dimensions. You can get a drawing of the piece of furniture with all the dimensions on it. Sometimes they're more in-depth than other times. I think with the bed, and I'll try and include that in the video. I'll try and include the still picture. I think it had like every dimension that there was. It was great. So I literally take that into my Procreate on my iPad, and I just transcribe all the numbers down to the size that I'm doing, whether it's 112, 124. So this is 124. Everything in this project is 124, which is also called half scale, which is 6 inches equals 1 foot. So when you're changing dimensions of something, if the bed is 6 feet long, then it's going to be 3 inches long. It's pretty easy to do. And again, I really like this scale because I think you can get away with fewer details. These drawers don't open. The drawer handles are simply pieces of wire, but they're effective. And it's a nice, I like the size. I don't know, I'm having fun with it. So there's not a tutorial for this yet. There will be, though. I have all the photos to put it together, but it's really pretty simple. It's a foam core base. Now the edge of foam core is the exact width of a coffee stirrer, so I never have a foam edge showing. I'll always cover it with a coffee stirrer. Another foam piece on top of that, a little bit bigger, and that would be the actual dimension of the bed itself. And then surrounded with the tongue depressor, although they're cut down a little bit, so they're not the full width of a tongue depressor. The headboard is made out of 332-inch basswood. You could also take 2 tongue depressors, put them together this way with a seam in the middle, glue them and clamp them, and then cut it to fit, and you'd have the same effect. You'd have a seam, but once you paint it and varnish it, I don't think you'd notice it. Then I put another piece of foam core in the bed, some quilt batting over the top of that. I wrapped it in some white linen sheet, and then I made a comforter. One of the big issues with this scale, with any scale really, but fabric itself has a scale, and that's hard to get around. You can't use anything very heavy because it won't drape, it won't fall nicely, it doesn't have the weight. So if you've got a blanket on a bed, it's on the bed, it hangs nicely and drapes because it has weight to it. When you're working with pieces that are 3 inches wide, there's no weight, so they don't hang. Now, there's ways to get around that. You can soak your piece of fabric in glue if you want, and it would be stiff. It wouldn't be soft to the touch, but you could drape it, and it would look like it was draped. I tend to just hunt around till I find fabric that's really thin. If you go through your wardrobe and you find clothes that you're not using, you can find some really, like an old t-shirt that's really thin, then it's great because it'll scale down nicely. So this is the bed, shelf, drawers, nightstand, all in one piece. Little cushions and a little decorative bolster, I guess you want to call it. And there it is. Little styrene floor lamp. It is made of white polystyrene. You can get that at any hobby shop, Train, Model Builders. You can order it online. It's about probably 332 inches thick, maybe. You cut a white base of wood that is a little smaller than 3/4 of an inch. I'll probably do a tutorial on this too, but you can also just make it up. You're basically just making, you need 4 rectangles the same size. And you know, you want it like 5 feet tall or something. You don't want it 8 feet tall, and you don't want it 3 feet wide. So you just have to judge accordingly. This one's about 3/4. No, this one's about 1/2 inch around. So that makes it about a foot. So you just need to build a hollow rectangle to start with. And then you have a skewer and you have another piece of wood that's a little bit bigger. This is like 3/4 of an inch wide. And whenever I'm putting dowel and wood together, I will drill a hole in each so that it's nice and solid. I like to use, I forgot the glue. The glue for the polystyrene that you use is this model building cement. So you can't just use ordinary glue. Maybe super glue, I don't know, but this works really well. It kind of melts it together. So there's a small window of time that you have to play with. It might, if it's the first time you've used it, you might want to just play around with a few scrap pieces first just to get the feel of it. But with straight pieces like this, it's pretty easy. There's a little brush on the end and it's thin. And you just brush it on one side and then hold the two together. And you can hold it till it dries. Like it's not a long drying time. It's not really drying. It's actually melting the 2 pieces of plastic together. And then what I use for lights a lot is, they're called balloon lights. And they're designed for weddings and special events where you put these things in balloons. And then the balloons are all lit from the inside. So they twist on and off. They hang if you need to hang them. A lot of times I want them to sit flush on something, whether it's inside a lamp. For this one, I didn't bother because I just plunked it in. It's hard to see, but I guess you can see it. But sometimes I want it to stand straight up on a desk or something with a different base, and I cut these off. And if you look back in the video to the wardrobe I just showed you, these became the door handles. So I knew they were going to come in handy someday for something. I just wasn't sure what. And you can replace the batteries in them. So if you need to, you can. But honestly, I think the lights are cheaper than the batteries. So you might just buy more lights. So that is the little standing floor lamp. I did a couple little chairs. This one I don't think I'm going to use. These chairs were both made out of, the fabric on them anyway, was made out of a very thin faux leather. Very fine, really, really fine. I wish I knew where, I got it off Etsy. I could find it again, but it's just a nice, I don't think you can see the texture on it, but if you get in most faux leathers that you're going to get, the texture is going to be that of what it would be like real life. And so this is almost scaled down. Where are we going here? So I don't have a tutorial on these yet either, although I have one in the works. When I first made the office chair, I had this back on it, on this chair. Now, this was not blue, so they were both white at that time. And I'll tell you how I painted them in a minute. But I had this back on this chair, and I think it was just too heavy, and I wouldn't stand up, and it didn't look right. It didn't look like an office chair. So I took them apart, made this back, and I held this back together with a mask nose aluminum strip that you put on your face masks, and they're adhesive, but I still glue them because the adhesive isn't really strong enough to keep them together. It does swivel a little bit, And I think that this was a juice box straw, or part of a juice box straw. With the wooden legs cut out of a coffee stirrer, just put on, I don't know if you can see it, if I hold it up here maybe, like so. And this black cording is a nice thing to have around. It's called a Buna cord. It's a very thin vinyl cording and it glues well with super glue. You almost have to use like a pin to spread it because you need a tiny, tiny amount. And you have to go pretty slow, but it does cover up a lot of seams and it makes it look really finished. So with this one, as I said, it was white as well. I made a new seat for it just out of probably a pill bottle lid or a lid off something. It became the round seat. The same white leather, drilled the holes for the legs, cut the legs on an angle. That was a pain in the neck, but I mean, you have to do it sometimes. And I had the back already, so I attached the back to the seat. And then I used a leather dye that I had, and I painted the chair with the leather dye. You could probably use acrylic paint. I'm thinking that would work just as well. I happen to have the leather dye, so that's what I used. So those two little chairs. I did 3 little plants for this room. We'll talk about this one first, although they're all kind of made to the same method. So this is a potted palm. I used a dowel for this, a little bit thicker than a skewer for the trunk. Wrapped some twine around it, 3 different sections. It's a little bit longer than this because it sticks down in the pot, so it's probably 3 inches in length altogether. I painted it brown. I never paint anything in one color. Always use a couple of different colors because everything has a texture and everything has varying shades. So you don't want it all just a solid brown. So use brown, use a little white, use a little black. It's kind of like faux, and you're sort of making highlights and shadows where in a large size thing, they naturally occur. But when it's small like this, I think it just helps with the look of it. So when this is a plumber's cap from the hardware store. You can get them in white plastic too, but then you can also just use a plastic lid off something. But I like the copper. I think it looks nice. You've put some glue in it, stick a piece of florist foam in it, put a bit of glue on the dowel after it's painted, stick that in, put glue on top of the foam, and I used coffee for the dirt. And for the leaves, once that was all dry, let that dry so that you can handle it without disturbing it. While it's drying, I took a disposable aluminum pie plate and I cut out, I don't use the ridged edges, you cut out just the center part. And I used my airbrush just because my airbrush is new and I wanted to try it out and I thought it was a good kind of practice project. But you could just paint it with a brush. You do not need an airbrush for this. It was kind of overkill, but I just wanted to play. And again, not many, but maybe 3 or 4 colors of green and sort of streaky, stripy. Don't plan it. You want it organic. And remember, it's pretty small. Each leaf is probably 2 inches. And that's probably big, 1.5 inches. And again, what I did this time was I just did it straight on the pie plate, and it did the paint didn't adhere as well as I think it could. So I think if I were doing it again, and I probably will, I would sandpaper that aluminum pie plate just a little bit, just enough to give it a bit of a tooth, and then paint it, and then let those dry good and dry. And then I didn't shape them. I stuck them all on first, bigger ones on the outside, smaller ones in the center. I used tacky glue for that. I think I put some painter's tape around it just to keep it snug. And then I set it aside till it was really good and dry, like not an hour, but like the afternoon. And then I bent these into shape. And I think I'm going to put some Mod Podge on it at the end. I think if you sand the pie plate, I don't think you'd have to do that step. And it depends if you want it glossy, do you want it matte? Whatever. So that's a potted plant. This cute little thing is really tiny. It's going to be for the bedside table. The leaves are made the same way. I think there was a third one, but I don't see where it is. And the little vase was actually at Christmas. We had those Christmas crackers that you pull, and there's a toy inside each one. And one of the kids got a bowling game, and this is the bowling pin. So I cut the top off and just stuck a few spare leaves on there. Be a little vase. The third one, and I have made a lot of not a lot, but I've made a number of 112 scale, I'm going to put it here, 112 scale macrame plant hangers. And I thought they were small when I was making them, and they're not even close to how small this one is. I had to keep cutting it down because it's hanging over top of that chaise lounge. And every time I made it, it was like going to be sitting on the person's lap. So I guess I didn't measure well enough when I started. I did. I don't know what happened. It just kind of seemed to kind of grow. When I'm doing the 112 scale ones, I do a lot of different knots, half hitches and knots, and it gets pretty fancy, just like a real macrame plant hanger. With this one, I just kept it so simple because I thought there's no way, first of all, that you can even see it, and my hands wouldn't be able to do it. There's just a little bit of wire at the top to create a hook, and the leaves are all made the same way. The little pot is from one of my daughter's vape cartridges. It's a cap, disposable silicone cap. They don't paint well, but this one some of them come in color. So this one was kind of a neat, cool color. And the same method as before, you plunk the sponge in, a little glue. You don't need the coffee because you can't even see it. And then I just put a little tacky glue on the end of each leaf, stuck them in, and then shaped it after it was done. Some plants. A third little footstool. I don't think I'm going to use the blue chair in the previous video. I think I'm going to use this instead. And this is what I meant by the leather. Some of the faux leathers that you get will have a larger texture. So that, in real life, that is going to be a huge leather texture. But it works for this, I think. I used a prescription cap for the base, some quilt batting for the top, this leather to cover it with, so there's just a strip around it, and then a round piece for the top. I usually use this kind of a stencil when I'm cutting rounds. I mean, if you have a Cricut cutter, you could, but for me, setting the Cricut up and getting the right size of circle, it's just, for one, if I was doing 20, definitely I would use the Cricut and cut them out. But for one, I just use one of these, cut the circle out. And then because this faux leather has a white core, you end up kind of with an unsightly white seam. And that's again where the Buna cord comes in handy, because you can fix that seam. And you could paint that if you wanted, like I showed you on the blue one. I didn't bother with this one because I thought the black was kind of a nice contrast. So, little footstool. This might be my favorite piece. It is a little upholstered bench, chaise lounge. My friend calls it a canapé. I don't know. To me, a canapé is something you eat, but we'll just let that go. I just think it's just so cute. It's just about 6 feet long. It's 3 inches, but 6 feet in real life. So it's going to, be comfortable enough to lay on. Some little bolsters. Now, again, with the 112 scale, I would have left these bolsters unattached, and they would have been fine. But with this size, everything is so very light, and it's so tiny that the things are flying all over the place. So I did end up using a little bit of fabric glue on them. Again, it's not really going to be a play set, so I didn't feel it necessary to have them removable. So this is all made out of coffee stirrers and a little bit of doweling, and the bottom was a tongue depressor. There is a video for this on my YouTube channel and on my website. Again, it's a short and sweet video, but projects aren't hard, so I think you'll be fine. And each tutorial has a printable PDF with the sizes of the pieces that you need. I used a thin suede. The other nice thing about this size is that you don't need very much material. So little pieces of wood, tiny pieces of fabric. I thought I was out of this orange suede, and I looked at a little scrap and thought, well, that's big enough for this project. Some quilt batting to make the cushion, and cute little bench. And the last piece I want to show you is this funky little desk. I wanted a corner desk, so there's a couple things I want to point out. First of all, this is an example of how I glued things on, because every time I put my hand in to do something, I was knocking everything off this desk till it was driving me nuts. So it's a little bit crooked. Sometimes I glue them. I think with that one, I just used a bit of that blue tacky stuff, but it's too small. If you see the little pen, if you can see the little pen, that's the end of a straight pin. So that gives you an idea of how little a things are. That's the end of a straight pin, and I just dipped the flat end in black. And the keyboard is just a piece of plastic with some silver dots. The computer is metal that I have. It's like a storage box, and so it's thicker than a high plate. It's, I think, a bit thicker than a tin can would be, but you can still cut it with scissors. Barely, but you still can. And I make a lot of stuff out of that. That is, but you cut it and then you kind of file it. And then the front is just a piece of black vinyl. These plants are made the same way as the other ones were. And the little desk, again, was a design from Wayfair. And because I went into the dimensions and weights and dimensions, I got every measurement I needed, and it was all nicely drawn out for me. So that worked out perfect. So that's the little computer desk that will have the white chair sitting in front of it. So now I'm going to put it all together for you.